We are on.
Season.
Yeah.
I actually don't know that I'm
Yeah, that's
sick. Well, obviously there's something wrong. Let's just be real. But I don't know
If
that
you want a
I
cough drop, I have some.
I brought my green tea with honey, and I think I sound worse than I feel.
right.
So, and I've been this way for several days, so I.
Well, that's good.
Well,
I'm just
no problem.
cautious.
Do you want to move to?
I'm okay. I think everyone is more of a risk than you are, so I'm okay.
I'm pretty sure I got it from some small human that's in my life, so.
Yeah, understand.
Well, should we?
Yeah, we should get going.
Started? Okay.
That's pretty
All right,
good.
yep. So call JP&L to order at 6:09. So Tyler, do you want to kick off the 2020 Human Resource Manual updates?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, if you look in your, let's go to the memo first, and I'll just give a broad summary real quick. HR manual, we always do this at the end of the year. We kind of, as the year goes on, we collect a number of different policy revisions and changes, so we don't constantly have to be going to the HR manual throughout the year. So these are in the memo, we kind of highlighted the 5 big changes. There's other smaller, just very almost administrative changes. And if you have any other questions on those throughout the manual, I'm happy to cover that. But the 5 big ones, if I just go through fairly quickly, and then if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer. One is we're eliminating paper paychecks. Right now we have, I think, 6 employees that still get pay stubs of paper checks. So we are eliminating that this year. So we've got, whether they wanted a work email or a private email, and that's how all the other employees get their pay stubs. And so those employees will do the same. So we changed some language just to clarify that we'll be going to that system. So not a significant change, but just something to note as we continue to try to go a little bit more electronic and 21st century stuff. So number 2 is a little bit more significant. We're updating some vacation language. So right now, when we have a new employee that begins, unless it specifies in a letter of agreement, what will happen is they don't have any vacation to start, and we always give vacations on people's paychecks at the first of the year, based on what category they're in. So if someone starts, let's say July 1, they would have to wait 6 months before they would get any vacation. And then July 1, what we would do is we would then give them the 2 weeks that's the category that they would be at, and then they would have the 2 weeks to utilize. If we had an employee then that ends up leaving in order to determine if they owe money for vacation or if we need a credit for vacation, we then do a separate formula based on vacation or their start date. It's a little different system than a lot of other organizations use, but it's one of those things that once you start with a system, it's really hard to change it. So, because a lot of other organizations just accrue as you go, this is just a different system. We can, we've been working with it fine, but it just makes it a little bit more complicated. The issue with this is if an employee, let's say, starts early in the year, February or March, they have to wait 9, 10, 11 months before they get any vacation to be eligible to use. So what I'm proposing, and basically what the language summarizes, is that we would prorate that. So like in the example I provided, if an employee starts July 1, well, there's only 6 months left in the year, so we would prorate that 2 weeks to 1 week, and they would be eligible to use 1 week during the 6 months of that first year. So it's a little change on how we're doing it, but I think from a retention perspective especially, that would be really helpful. Also recruitment, sometimes it's really hard to get an employee to come here, especially earlier in the year if they know they can't use any vacation for a 9-10 month period.
Definitely.
And I don't want that to ever be a reason why we can't get an employee that we want to come here. So what this will do is it changes the payout on the back end. So it just means that, on the payout, on how we do the formula, it will be adjusted at that moment. So it's from like a financial perspective, or cost and path perspective, I don't envision that really being a huge financial impact in those terms. So, any questions on that at all?
No.
Okay. Adverse weather and emergency closing leave policy. So I think in January or February, we had a snow event that we ended up closing the buildings, and then, so we made note of it last year, cause there was some language that basically allowed employees the option that if they wanted to still come to work when the building was closed, they could.
Mm.
And I think through that process, we realized that that was probably not a good or safe, procedure, so we wanted to change that with policy. We looked at a number of other policies, and one that we agreed on is that if the building's closed, we don't have any staff come here unless they're authorized, which would have to be, I think, authorized to the village manager, I think is how we have described. And those would really only be essential for communication, or if they actually have to be present to lock down the building or something, it would be a very minimum amount of people. Obviously, this would be only for like in-office personnel. For DPW and police, we would still have those personnel working as we have in the past. For those that wouldn't, or then would be not able to come to work, they would have two options. They would either be on unpaid for that day, or they would have to use one of their accruals. The big discussion was whether they use sick accrual or not, and there's a lot of policies that say yes or say no. In the end, we felt because it's out of the employees' out of their control, that there's a snow event, that we would allow them to use a sick accrual. We felt it was important though that they have to use their accrual bank, because we have DPW and police personnel here that are working and are being paid straight time at the, during the weekdays for that time. So we didn't feel it would be appropriate for other employees to be paid that same straight time when they're at home. We felt at least at a minimum they need to be using their accruals. The library board did pass a different policy that states library employees will be paid straight time and don't have to use their accruals. So they do have a different policy, and we've talked with the library, and that's something that they feel strong about.
Yeah.
So this would be, we would have different policies, but there's other instances in the HR manual, we have different policies, so that's the nature of what it would be. But in the nutshell, that's kind of a summary of what that policy would be moving forward.
So if they can make up the time?
Yes, they also have the option to make up the time, so if they didn't wanna use any of their
Right,
accruals, as long as their supervisor approves that, they could adjust their work schedule to make it up.
Can they work from home? Can people work remotely if they got some project they have to have done?
They can, if it's appropriate. I mean, like customer service, for instance.
Right.
Like, I think it would be a little bit more difficult, but if they have specific projects that their supervisor's having them work on, they still could. And so we have that built in that they could, but it has to be supervisor approved.
And if they don't have sick time accrued, they can use,
They can use any accrual, so vacation, if they have
Okay.
account time built up,
Right.
they can use that. They have no, if it's like a newer employee at the time, they have no accruals, then their really only option is to, well, I guess they still could make it up later in the week, otherwise they'll have to do an unpaid day.
It's
And
pretty tough.
honestly,
That's pretty tough.
I mean, we're talking to some of our more veteran employees, and the amount of times we've had to close a building is very low, like once a decade. I mean, it's not very often. So we're hoping that this is a circumstance that we don't have to do often, but we just want to be prepared for the next circumstance.
So Rebecca, I'm thinking like you're a few blocks from here. You can trudge over, and where other people are driving in, which is where you start getting, people driving.
Yeah, my commute's a lot more safe.
I mean, so you could safely get to the building. I just seems kind of, if people are local and could get, especially when you're requiring them to take their own leave to get to work. I don't, but
I mean, how, yeah, I guess my question would be how often in the last couple of years, was the building closed twice this past winter?
Just once. And I think asking others, I think it was the only time in the last decade it was closed. So that shows it's pretty infrequent.
Yeah.
Okay.
How often do we have a polar vortex?
Oh, is that what it
No, I'm
was
just kidding.
for?
No, it wasn't the polar vortex. It was the snow. That was the last
Well,
time.
there isn't that many, outside the library, there's only a handful of people that are not working in the village hall, essentially, is the only people. DPW, they're all working, right? And the police are all working under this policy?
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah. And this is only if the building, I mean, the changes we made is only if the building is closed.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if there's been other circumstances, but there's always the opportunity that you would adjust work schedules.
Right,
Just
yeah,
that,
okay.
you know, if someone has a
All
longer
right.
commute or something, but this is only, the changes are only if the building is closed.
Alright.
And does that, like, if the building needs to close early, or?
It would be the same thing,
Okay.
yeah, so those hours, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay. This is a new policy, the sick leave sharing program. What triggered it was we had an employee who had a non-work injury, that, was not their fault. It was actually, they were on their way to attend a public, fundraiser, like a fundraiser for one of the friends groups. And they ended up, being hit and suffered an injury due to it, and they didn't have enough leave in their accrual bank to make up for the time, so they had to go on unpaid status for a few weeks before they could return. And I think, one of the things that organizations have is some kind of leave donation program that, for circumstances like this, other employees can donate some accrual time, so that if you, so that an employee could then still be paid while being on that leave or on a leave of absence. This would only apply to FMLA qualified events. If it's work comp or something that wouldn't qualify under FMLA, it does not count. We have some limitations that were built into place that employees could only donate up to 40 hours for an employee for an event per year, so that, avoid someone from donating, countless hours that they have built up. I did mark in the fiscal note that there would be a fiscal impact for this item. It's unknown just because you don't know how many people are gonna utilize the program and to what extent. But in general terms, the fiscal note, or the fiscal impact would be, you have an employee that would typically be on unleave paid and now they're being paid. So it would be for whatever that portion of leave would be, that would be part of the fiscal impact. The other component that is important to note, that for employees that are hired prior to 2012, they get to use their sick bank as a retirement benefit. They have the option of either A, cashing out 50% of their sick leave as a payout, or they could apply it to their health insurance if they would like to help pay for health insurance costs, which most of our employees do.
Is it 100% toward health, or is it 50%?
If it's on the single plan, and those are employees only hired prior to 2002. If you're
2002.
if you're between 2002 and 2012, then it's 50% single, 25% family. That the village would cover. The employee would cover the remaining costs.
But their sick leave, when they leave, they say if they have 1,000 hours, you give 50% of the value of the sick leave towards cash, or 50% also toward future health.
If they take the payout, they
Yeah.
cannot be on their health insurance plan.
Okay,
So, and a lot of people when they retire want to be on the health insurance plan.
Right.
So if you want to be on the health insurance plan, the only option then you really have is to not take the payout and apply it to your health insurance.
okay. And if you don't take you apply it, you're applying only 50% of the value of the sick leave, or the 100% of your balance at retirement?
Yeah, whatever, you're applying to whatever the portion that the village is not paying for. So like right now, if you're on the 100% single, what it's going towards is if there's any increase, so that's also percentages the time of your retirement.
Right,
So obviously insurance is going up. So let's say an employee retired in 2015. Any increases that we've seen from 2015, the employee is responsible for paying for as
Right.
well. So that would be an example where their sick bank would help pay for those increases.
but do they get credit for 100% of their sick bank, or only 50% of their sick balance?
It's 50%.
50%, you take it either as cash, or
Yeah.
you take it to apply
Correct.
to your, okay, so
Yes.
it's 50%
Correct.
for
For
since
either.
22.
And it's we have a maximum too, which I don't remember how many hours. I
Okay.
think it's like 1,200 hours or something.
Yeah.
But there's
Yeah.
some maximum.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions on the sick leave sharing program?
Yeah, I got a whole bunch of them,
Okay.
as we've talked.
Yeah.
I mean, I've operated one of these programs for a long time, and we only allow it annual leave, because the employee actually kind of owns their annual leave. Sick leave is really, unless they're sick or they have an approved use, is the employer's, and for the new employees, it just goes away. It's there for them to use. So you're gonna, like people, once you get a fairly substantial balance, and this is probably more out into the future because you got this transition going,